Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2026. The topic is nutrition, and the title is The Impact of Too Much Protein. We're going to discuss specifically fat loss, daily energy, and muscle growth. So we're not looking at like a health impact here. If you're ever worried about like too much protein on kidneys, one of the studies I read when I was doing my master's in nutrition, they had people eating 400 grams of protein a day for 14 days in a row, and there was no impact on kidneys. I've worked with people who do bodybuilding where they eat, up to 1.5. Sometimes they've eaten 2 grams per pound of body weight on protein and no impact on the kidneys. There isn't a lot of data to support that if somebody has healthy kidney function, that there's an amount of protein that people can actually sustainably eat that would cause a problem. Meaning, if 6 times your body weight in protein would cause kidney problems, who in the hell can eat 6 times your body weight in protein on a regular basis? So that's not really a major concern. Now, if you have impaired kidney function, then yes, you got to look at some blood work and get tests done and go through the process of that. But if you have healthy kidney function, you're going to be okay. So if we go back to now the topic of fat loss, daily energy, and muscle growth, I wanted to touch on these 3 because they were happening with a couple of my clients. So for each of these clients, I give them a calorie range and a protein range. We'll talk about distribution of calories and proteins throughout the day. We might throw in some like sugar. If I want them to control their sugar intake, maybe it's a little high, or we're trying to control blood sugar for various reasons. But if we look at calories and protein, they have a range that they're supposed to be in during the day. Often, though, clients do not listen. Surprise, surprise. Everybody's human. But what will happen is if somebody wants to get leaner and lose body fat, they'll sometimes say, okay, he says, this many calories and this much protein, but maybe I'll just eat extra protein so that way I'm not eating as many carbs. And they'll think, if I eat less carbs, I'll lose fat faster. So they increase their protein, they eat more fats, and they decrease carbs. They're within the calorie range they're supposed to be in, but their protein is too high. Likewise, if somebody wants to grow, the same thing, somehow our brain thinks that's going to work as well, is they'll stay within their calorie range, but they'll overeat protein thinking that's going to lead to more growth. So it's funny how the same response in both people is believed to give opposing responses. I do understand it, though, is the fat loss people would assume that they're in a calorie deficit, and adding protein is going to make more of an energy-based deficit, meaning it's going to reduce carbs and fats, therefore it'll help burn off more body fat. That's not true, but that's the mindset, the thought they have. Whereas people who are growing, they're in a caloric surplus, so they think adding more protein will help spare them from excessive carbs and fats, which could possibly contribute to unwanted body fat. So they'll think, okay, I'm just going to grow more and be leaner. Now, in my early years of going through all these things, did the exact same stuff. So, I'll sit here and make some funny comments about clients thinking they're going to get the same thing. It's hilarious because I've done it. I did it whenever I was trying to learn all this stuff in my teens, and that's also partly why I went to school, was I wanted to figure out, why are things not working the way I thought they would? And getting my education, I got a bachelor's in health and phys ed, so teaching health and physical education. There's definitely some nutrition in there, but none of it is like aesthetic-based nutrition, and it's not really for weight manipulation as much as just general blood health. They want you to be able to tell somebody how to eat so that where their blood markers are good. Very valuable, but it doesn't have to do with aesthetic nutrition like the way you look, or performance nutrition, which is mostly what I do all the time. What the benefit of that, though, by doing that in my bachelor's of health and phys ed, getting my trainer certification, and doing the master's in nutrition, all of those were focused on blood marker health The personal training certification included performance-based nutrition, but it was aerobic performance, not anaerobic like strength-based stuff, and it didn't have any aesthetic. So I had to learn all that on my own through trial and error. And getting the degrees was very helpful because now I know how to do aesthetic nutrition while keeping people healthy. I know how to do performance nutrition while keeping people healthy. So that's helpful. But the performance aspect, especially in relation to anaerobic activities, meaning like without oxygen, and that would be like weight training, strength training, stuff like that. The training, the nutrition for that, and the nutrition for aesthetic nutrition, meaning the way you look, I had to learn on my own. I got to apply the information that I learned, through those degrees. And then I read books like Nutrient Timing by John Ivey, Championship Bodybuilding by Chris Aceto, and a gajillion of other books. So I learned it through my degrees, through reading books, and then through trial and error. And the trial and error was absolutely equally as helpful as the formal education, but the formal education was helpful to understand what I was experiencing during the trial and error. It was a great synergistic process. So I'm very blessed, very grateful that I got to go through all of that, because I now have a really good understanding of what's happening when I try dietary experiments, and I get to help other people all the time, like every day. So it's pretty awesome. Now, for the clients who are struggling with this, they're actually eating too much protein. I wanted to talk through kind of what was happening and some of the thought process and adjustment that we're making. So that way, if you are happening to make these nutritional kind of mistakes, that you can kind of get it corrected, figure out what's going on, and get you back on the right track. For fat loss, what's happening there when somebody has a known amount of calories, and that includes the appropriate amount of protein. I'm going to try not to get lost too much in the weeds here, but I want to give you a little bit of numbers. We know that the general recommended amount of protein is 0.6 grams per pound of body weight up to 1.0 grams per pound of body weight. There's definitely some lower recommendations, which I have not found to be helpful. So for example, you'll see sometimes there's like 0.8 per kilogram, which would be less than 0.6 per pound, just if you use a metric system. But that low of protein, people have joint fatigue, like joint issues, muscle issues. They have overall body fatigue. When you start feeding them up to at least 0.6, they do start to feel better. So I have found that people who consume under 0.6 grams per pound of body weight in protein benefit from more protein. But on the other end is I've had clients as high as 1.5 grams per pound of body weight in protein, and going up any higher didn't really seem to have any benefit. We actually benefited more from increasing carbs and fats at that point to fuel their daily energy, and they actually became what would be called protein sparing, meaning we had to give enough energy in carbs and fat energy that the protein was free to be used for growth. So that overall whole range of 0.6 grams per pound of body weight up to 1.5, I have had client experience knowing that that does cause positive benefit, and I've experienced what happens when you go outside of that range. Now, personally, I did a diet once where I ate 2 grams per pound of body weight for 10 months just to see if it helped me grow. It did not. It was an absolutely horrible process. I had low energy because I was under consuming my carbs and fats. I grew very poorly. It was a shit experience. But I was very stubborn, and I wanted to know that I had done it like long enough and to the detail. So I ended up doing it for 10 months. And then whenever I stopped that and brought it back down to about 1 gram to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, but I didn't reduce my calories. The calories I took out of protein, I replaced back with carbs and fats. I grew way better, had better energy, was leaner looking, like everything went better. And I was like, damn, I just wasted 10 months. But it wasn't a waste in the sense that I now know for certain that, at least for me, that 2 grams per pound of body weight did not work, assuming that I was still trying to maintain typical caloric levels. If I were to increase calories, carbs, and fats on top of that, Could I have maybe produced more growth? Definitely that's possible. I absolutely would have accrued more body fat though. And that's not what I wanted. So it's trying to play that game of providing enough protein that I can maximize muscle growth. And then I need to provide enough carbs and fats to fuel that growth. But I don't want too many carbs and fats because then I just gain a bunch of body fat. But I don't want too few of carbs and fats because then I'm not maximizing the growth, the protein growth. So there's this wonderful little sweet spot that isn't, you can definitely get really damn close all of the time. But are you ever going to get it like to the gram precise every single day? No. Because our activity level changes to some degree every day. Our demand for protein synthesis and muscle creation changes a little bit every day. It's impossible to get it to the gram precise every single day, but you can get it really narrowed down and get it very accurate to where people can get great results. And that is the balance that I typically send it to clients when I send them their information. Now, we might have to play a little bit with it, see how their body responds, make some adjustments, but we're starting them out at the best guess. It's a pretty damn educated guess about where their protein versus overall total calories need to be. The total calories do include the calories of protein. But the difference, once you subtract the calories of protein from total calories, that difference now is your carbs and fats. That's the amount of carbs and fats you have. We've done a bajillion studies, and it's been proven that you can lose body fat on a low carb or low fat diet. You don't have to distinguish between one or the other. You can build muscle on a high fat or high carb diet. You don't have to distinguish between one or the other. You essentially are going to find what works well for you, how your body responds best, what fits your schedule, your food preferences, finances, all that stuff. So there is a diet that will feel best for you individually, but you don't need to force yourself to fit into either a low carb, high carb, low fat, or high fat diet. You just eat carbs and fats based on your preferences and what you need at the time of those meals. And what I mean by that, for example, is if I'm about to be active, I want the energy of the meal to be available quickly, and that's going to be typically better than to choose proteins and carbs because carbs digest quickly. Whereas if I'm not really doing much, I'm kind of sitting at my computer doing kind of nothing, then it's better to have fats because they digest slowly, so I have a more slow, steady release of energy into the bloodstream that kind of matches my slow, steady use of energy by sitting on my butt doing nothing. There are going to be people who, prefer one or the other, and you'll have people be confused about, well, when I take carbs away, I always lose weight. You lose water weight, not fat. We've talked about that before, and that does get people in trouble in the sense that they'll revert to that mindset that when I reduce carbohydrates, I lose weight, and the false belief that a reduction in weight equals a reduction in body fat. And that is not true. 100% not true. No. So we want to recognize that eating carbs is okay. Eating fats is okay. It's which do you need and when do you need them. With all that said, getting back to the individual subtopics of fat loss is essentially what happens is we are creating an environment, ideally, where we have enough protein to meet our protein demands. And then carbs and fats to just under what we actually need to fuel our activities of the day. If we're just under, and I'll talk about how much under in a second, if we're just under, what happens then is we burn the carbs and fats. Our body says, I need a little more energy for today. We have all this body fat sitting around. Why don't I just take a little bit of the body fat? So it takes a little bit of the body fat, and then the body kind of takes inventory, and it says, okay, we lost some body fat, but we still have some left. We're okay. There's no need for us to replace that body fat. Now, why would the body want to have body fat? It's to protect organs. If we don't have any body fat on our body, we have no reserve energy. If we were to miss a meal and not consume energy via food, our organs would start to be underfueled, and we could potentially die. It doesn't happen immediately, but that's what the body is designed to do, is to prevent us from dying. So it will keep some energy reserve around just in case we miss a meal, just in case the body needs it. So if we're consistent with eating carbs and fats, we're consistent with eating energy, but it's just slightly under what our body needs, our body will give away some fat, take inventory and say, it's okay, we still got some left. You're consistent again for a whole nother day, another couple meals, the body's getting kind of what it needs, but just a little bit under, it'll give away a little more body fat. Then another day of being consistent, giving it kind of what it needs, but just a little bit under, the body will give away a little more body fat. The idea is we present the body with this wonderful, consistent environment to where the amount of body fat that it has is continually believed to be unnecessary. So it'll give up a little bit, but not fight to replace it. The less consistent we are, meaning we miss meals, we undereat, we overeat, the body then feels less secure, and therefore will start to protect body fat at a higher level of loss. So maybe before we could go from 30 pounds of body fat down to 5 before the body would freak out or start to protect it. Now we go from 30 to 20, and the body's like, this is so inconsistent of an environment, I don't really feel comfortable giving away anymore. So it stops that at 20. And then it starts to reduce caloric usage throughout the day rather than giving up calories via fat loss. The other component is if we're consistent, but the deficit is too great, then what happens is the body gets maybe 60, 70% of what it needs, and it says, holy crap, it's a huge gap there. I'm going to have to give up a lot of body fat to cover today. That's so much at one time that I don't feel secure. And I'm going to try to fight against that happening again. I'm going to reduce the amount of calories I burn. I'm not going to give up the body fat as much. I'm going to try to replace the body fat as fast as I can. So the body starts to fight the process. So if we're inconsistent, it fights fat loss. If we take too large of a deficit, it fights fat loss. One of the ways that we would accidentally create too large of a deficit is having our calories appropriate, but too much protein. If we have too much protein, that actually means that we're eating too little of our carbs and fats. That's creating that too drastic of a deficit, and that's going to cause the body to start to protect against the process of fat loss. So in fat loss, that is why eating too much protein is a negative thing. What will start to happen is you'll start to feel tired. You'll have pretty crappy daily energy. You're going to feel soft and pudgy. Your body composition is just going to look bad. You're going to feel like poofy and kind of watery around your waistline. And your weight will eventually kind of stop. Your weight won't go down. And that's because the body is now reducing caloric usage and fighting to replace the fat that is being burned off. So the process is you'll lose a little fat, put fat back on. Lose a little fat, put fat back on. And the whole time your body's reducing the calorie burn, and it's trying to get rid of muscle tissue to help reduce the calorie burn. So it's a net negative in overall body composition change. So people can eventually weigh less, but they look worse, or they look the same. They go from a pear, a big pear, to a little pear, but they're always looking like a pear. That kind of thing. Your shape doesn't change. And that's an indication that the calorie deficit is too severe. So the body is going down in weight, but it's not going down in weight via pure fat loss. You're losing some muscle tissue along the way. You're losing some, water retention, glycogen storage. There's a lot of other things happening. You also just don't have as much waste in your body because you're probably at a deficit that you're not producing a lot of waste. Your body's using pretty much everything you're eating. So there's a lot of reasons why our weight would go down, but we don't necessarily look better. Now, I had a client that had that happening. In their journal, I was looking at their daily calories in protein. So I'll give you a couple numbers. Like one day they had 1,213 calories, 1,213 with 98 grams of protein. Next day, 1,427 calories with 138 grams of protein. The next day, 1,478 calories with 122 grams of protein. And I won't go through the rest of it. But what I went through and I looked at it, I'm looking at these numbers and I'm like, something seems off here. We have some days in which the calories are either too low and or the protein is too high. So her targets are 1,400 to 1,800 calories. I would like her to be able to eat more, but we have to start somewhere. Now, on one of the days, she only had 1,200 and some calories, not good, like little under there. Another day, she had 1,100 and some, not good, that's 200. Another day was 1,200. So she was eating too little on some of the days. So on some of the days where the protein was within target, her protein target is 100 to 130 grams. She was within her protein target on those days, but the calories were too low. So her protein percentage was actually too high. And then other days, the calories were correct. They were within our range, but the protein was way too high. So for example, her protein range is 100 to 130 grams, but one day she had 199 grams of protein. Another day was 163 grams of protein. Another day was 144, which doesn't sound drastic compared to the other two, but that's still over. So what I wanted to do was I actually showed her the percentage, the protein percentage. Now, ideally, we would like the percentage to be, and this is variable depending on the person, but somewhere between 25 to 33%. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room in there, and a lot of reasons why it would be, within that variance, but 25 to 33%. In her journal, she had her days were 32%, 38%, 33%, 35, 35, 40, 51, 42, 40. So protein started going up more and more and more and more. Now, this isn't atypical in the sense that people do fall into the trap. If I'm supposed to hit these calories and I'm trying to get my protein up, I'll just push my protein really up, and that'll help me still be eating less carbs. Like I said, that's typically what people try to avoid. I'm going to eat less carbs, and they think that's going to help them, but that actually hurts the process. Again, that creates that too severe of deficit that the body then starts to protect against. So we want to make sure that our protein is within 25 to 33% of our total calorie intake. Typically, if you go above that, things aren't going to go very well. If you go below that, then you might not actually be in a carb and fat deficit because you don't have enough protein to offset the total calorie count. Therefore, they actually don't lose fat because although they're eating what would be considered fat loss calories, they don't have enough protein calories. So they're actually in a surplus, or at least even just a maintenance of carb and fat calories. With that said, if the same is true of people who want to have maximal performance and they just kind of want to maintain their weight, they're going to have higher calorie count for their day. So their calories are going to be roughly probably a little in a surplus on exercise days, a little at maintenance or deficit on non-exercise days. But that protein percentage is still supposed to be somewhere between that 25 to 33%. When they start over-consuming protein, they don't necessarily see weight loss. They're going to feel sluggish during their training. They're just going to feel tired during the day. Again, their body composition looks soft and pudgy. Things just don't look good. They don't feel good. So if you're in that camp where you're wanting to have maximal training performance, workout performance, and you're not really looking to change your weight much, you just want to improve body composition at that weight, but you feel tired, you feel soft and pudgy, you're not getting the progressions in training you're looking for, you might be over-consuming protein compared to your carbs and fats. So that would be something to look into. And then another client example would be muscle growth. I had a client who was wanting to grow. We had his calories at around, I believe they were around 17 to 18%, 17 to 18 times body weight. So a typical maintenance style calories is going to be somewhere between 13 to 15. Fat loss is going to be around body weight times 13, maybe a little less. Those are just general ranges. So for him to be at body weight times 17 to 18, definitely a caloric surplus, without any doubt, right? He's going to be higher than the average. He's consuming a lot of calories. We would assume that that's going to fuel growth. What was happening for him was his body weight really wasn't changing. He wasn't growing. What we found was he was consuming too much protein. The caloric surplus that we wanted was being consumed by too much protein, not the extra carbs and fats that we wanted. The reason why we would have wanted carbs and fats was that they fuel the process of muscle growth. Protein is the material of muscle. That's what muscle is made out of. But how we make muscle requires energy. It requires energy that we get from carbs and fats. So we need both. We need excess protein to be the material that would be converted to muscle tissue, but we need excess carbs and fats to fuel the process of muscle creation. What was happening with him was he was over-consuming his protein, so much so that there wasn't the surplus of carbs and fats. He was actually in a carb and fat deficit. So therefore, he wasn't fueling the growth and formation of new muscle tissue. So he had all the protein he needed. He didn't have any energy to build the protein into muscle tissue. So that was something we saw with him. When we reduced his protein back down to under 33%, he started growing more. We actually pushed it down even lower to between 25 to 30%, and he actually grew even more. And we found the sweet spot for him was between 25 to 30% of his total calories being protein, and then pushing his calories up into the point where his weight was going up, but at an average of between 0.5 to 1 pound per week. And we look at that over a span of weeks and weeks and weeks, like 4 to 8 weeks. So that way he was growing muscle tissue, but wasn't growing body fat. He had a history of body image concerns. So therefore we wanted to be very cautious about building unnecessary body fat. So these are 3 examples, one in fat loss, one in daily energy, and one in muscle growth, to where too much protein negatively impacted the process. So eating more protein to reduce your carbs and fats does not help fat loss. Eating more protein to create more growth doesn't help if that comes at the expense of reducing carbs and fats to the point where there's no energy to fuel the growth. So we want to make sure that we have the right amount of protein. We know that somewhere between 0.6 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. We know that's somewhere between 25 to 33% of total caloric intake. And then within those ranges, you play around with it. For the total amount, the 0.6 to 1.5, around 1 gram is really good when people train 4 times a week. If you train with weights 4 times a week or more, 1 gram is great. You might have to move up a little bit from there. If you train less than that, then you might drop down from there, maybe 0.8, somewhere around there. And then 25 to 33% kind of depends on your activity level during the day. If somebody's highly active, they're on their feet. I work with a lot of personal trainers. Over half my clients are personal trainers. They're on their feet all the time. So we're going to be on that lower end of percentage, more along the lines of like 25%. So that way it allots more carbs and fats to account for their daily energy. If somebody's not as active during the day, then their protein percentage will be higher because we're then going to consume less carbs and fats. So they're going to be up around 33%. So the more active you are, you're going to have a lower percentage of total protein. The less active you are, the higher percentage of total protein. So it might be a little inverse to what people typically would think. So I thought that was helpful to go through. And I wanted to just throw that out there, let people think through that. And then if you have any questions specifically to yourself, if you're concerned if you're eating the right amount of protein or not, just shoot me a message on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can go to the homepage, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, there's a contact form, and you can send me a message with any questions you have. Awesome. Well, if you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people the podcast can help. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on the website. And if you like the information on the podcast, we do share more information and different information on our social media channels. So you can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.